In 1988, Tom Cruise was arguably the biggest star in the world. Top Gun had come out in 1986 and wound up being the top grossing movie of the year. It wasn't only a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon, and Cruise became a rare kind of movie star. He was a sex symbol for the ladies, but the guys liked him too. Speaking personally, having been born in 1981, I vividly remember owning the VHS tape of Top Gun and playing it on a loop. Cruise was my first concept of a movie star, and to kids like me, he was like a cool, big brother type figure. He was the guy we all wanted to be, with him riding motorcycles, rocking awesome hair, and an attitude which was never too threatening, while blasting awesome 80s rock music and having the girls fawn all over him. He was the man, and if any movie ever cemented his big screen stardom, it was 1988's Cocktail, which starred Cruise as the world's second coolest bartender. After Sam Malone on Cheers, of course. Cocktail is the very definition of a movie star vehicle. Thinly plotted, it only exists as a showcase of Cruise's charisma, and were anyone else playing the lead, it would only be a wisp of a movie. It's kind of trying to be the shampoo of the 1980s, but boy, it is nowhere near as layered as that movie. It came from Touchstone Pictures, which was a division of Walt Disney. Back in the 80s, they mastered the star-driven vehicle, producing a slew of comedies starring former B-listers they made into A-listers. Their hits included movies like Down and Out in Beverly Hills, Stakeout, Ruthless People, Outrageous Fortune, and, in 1987, their biggest hit ever, Three Men and a Baby. If any studio was primed to craft a music and sex-driven drama around Hollywood's newest heartthrob, it was them. However, Cocktail was originally supposed to be a bit weightier. It came from the pen of one Haywood Gould, who had done a page-one rewrite of one of the best movies of the 70s, Rolling Thunder, and specialized in darker fare like the Paul Newman action flick Fort Apache the Bronx and the They Cloned Hitler thriller The Boys from Brazil, amongst others. The film began life as a book written by Gould about a bartender in his 30s who struggled with the fact that his life simply couldn't live up to his ambitions. When Touchstone bought the material, Gould was tasked with turning his downbeat story into an upbeat one, starting by making his bartender character young and idealistic, with his whole life ahead of him. Cruise would play Brian Flanagan, but really, the character is essentially Maverick behind a bar. In fact, he's even playing a veteran, albeit of the Army rather than the Navy. Brian is just out of the service and has big dreams of making it in business. He heads to New York, but finds that his lack of a college degree means he can't get any entry-level job on Wall Street, so he takes some part-time work as a bartender, working under an older, aged bartender named Doug Coughlin, played by Brian Brown, who was just coming off the hit movie FX. Doug teaches Brian how to become a flair bartender, and soon the two are the hottest ticket in town, with them bartending at all the sexiest clubs. The two dream of opening their own place, but Ryan falls for a woman played by Gina Gershon, who Doug sleeps with in order to teach his protege not to fall in love. Brian hightails it to Jamaica in order to lick his wounds and tend bar on the beach, only for his mentor to track him down. Now Doug is married to an heiress, played by Kelly Lynch, and he encourages Brian to sink his claws into a rich woman in order to get his dreams financed. However, Brian has just fallen for an American girl, played by Elizabeth Shue, and he can't make up his mind between love and money. Being the 80s, money wins out, at first, only for Brian to eventually be taught a harsh lesson about how money can't buy happiness. While admittedly thin, co-star Kelly Lynch says the original cut of the film actually told a topical, layered story about love and money, but the studio opted to reshoot a big chunk of the movie. Indeed, the reshoots are painfully obvious, as Cruise's hair changes from scene to scene, as he'd grown his hair longer for his follow-up Rain Man and wasn't able to cut it. The film's continuity is a mess, and the ending is ridiculous in how it contrasts with the movie's message. We spend 90 minutes with Cruise's Brian Flanagan coming to terms with the fact that money can't buy happiness, but it turns out that his poor, pregnant lover is actually rich after all. What's worse is that Brian finds out way too early she's an heiress, making his pursuit of her in the last act feel more like a cold calculation, that he only loves her because she has money. They try to make us like Brian more by having Shue's father cut her off financially if she runs off with Brian, but given that the movie ends with him opening the sprawling bar of his dreams, did he really learn anything? Many criticize the film as emblematic of everything wrong morally with the me generation of the 80s. Here's the thing though, the movie still kicks a lot of ass. Why? 2 words: Tom Cruise. Any other actor would have made Brian repulsive, but Cruise is so damn likable that we always trust his intentions and root for him to get everything he wants. Cruise's megawatt charisma is turned up to 11 here, and the impression that this made on me as a 7-year-old watching it on VHS was profound. I would blast the cassette soundtrack while Flair bartending juice boxes for my friends. The fact that Brian was a vacuous yuppie meant nothing to me. He was Tom Cruise. Looking at the film now, it's easy to point out its faults, but glaring continuity issues aside, it's a slick movie.
Roger Donaldson directs this like a feature-length MTV video.
Critics may not have liked it back then, but as a piece of nostalgia, it's top-notch. Brian Brown is cool in his own right as Cruise's older mentor, and even now, it's tough not to drool over Elizabeth Shue and Kelly Lynch, both of whom I should mention have aged as well as Cruise himself. Of course, the movie's second biggest star, after Tom Cruise, is the soundtrack, which was engineered to be as big of a hit as the film itself, after the Top Gun soundtrack sold 9 million copies. The soundtrack for Cocktail would go quadruple platinum, largely thanks to the biggest hit song off the soundtrack, the Beach Boys' Kokomo, a song which some people hate, I kinda love. Plus there was the Bobby McFerrin Don't Worry Be Happy song, the Georgia Satellites cover of the Hippie Hippie Shake, and a bunch of others. The movie ended up being a giant hit, grossing $78 million domestically, making it the 8th biggest hit of the year. But what was number 1, you may ask? It just so happens the number 1 film also starred Tom Cruise and is the subject of our very next episode of Tom Cruise Revisited, Rain Man. In the end, Cocktail is silly, and compared to how amazing most of Tom Cruise's movies are, something of a footnote. He'd never act in a movie that is so thinly conceived or plotted again, but to those of us who grew up on Tom Cruise movies as kids, it cemented the concept of Cruise as the coolest guy of the 80s, and it's a flick I can't help but find to be an infectious blast.